Good evening. Um, as I was thinking of coming up here, I realized that we are all so much more than the labels that we wear and the titles that we have, and really the way that we get to know one another is through conversation, and the way we get to know ourselves is through conversation. So tonight I want to focus on three different conversations that I've had in my life. The first is the one that I've had with myself. The second is the one that I've been privileged to have with young people around the world. And the third is the changing role of diplomacy as a tool of conversation, or conversation as a tool for diplomacy, however you think, whichever one you think comes first. So I remember being 19 years old, and I was a sophomore in college, and I had been having chest pains for weeks, and I couldn't really take a deep breath. It would hurt if I took a deep breath. So finally, I didn't know what to do about this. Finally, I called my mom. I said, "Mom, these are my symptoms. What do I do?" And she said, "Come home and we'll go to the doctor and we'll figure it out." So we go to our doctor, who is my pediatrician. He'd been my doctor since I was 5 years old. And he did a thorough exam of me. And, at the end of it, he looked at me and he said, "Zeenat, I don't think anything's wrong with you except that you're having anxiety. I think what you're having is panic attacks." And so they both looked at me. I'm staring at both of their faces, and they're saying, "Is there any reason for this? Is there a reason why you're so stressed out?" And I looked at both of them and realized I couldn't say to them why I was so stressed out, that as a sophomore in college, a pre-med major, I was doing really poorly in school, and I was actually close to failing out of school because my parents had kind of chosen pre-med for me as a major, and it wasn't my passion. And so my parents immigrated to the United States from India in the 70s, before I was born. My dad came. He came with very little. His story is that he had $7 in his pocket, and he lived with some other college and students that he knew from India. And he started out by, his first job was sweeping the floor in a paint factory or a paint store, and he made it up the ranks of that organization to actually the top leadership there. After a couple of years of being in the States, he went back to India, married my mom, and brought her to a new country. The only person she knew was my dad, but they made a pretty good life for themselves, and they rose to being pretty solidly middle class. And I, as their eldest born daughter, was going to do what they told me to do. And for them, the surest bet for me to be successful was to do medicine. But it wasn't my passion, and it wasn't what I wanted to do. And it actually took me through a journey through my 20s and really into my 30s to really figure out what it was that I was passionate about, what I wanted to do. And I would have ideas, and then I would try them out. And in that course of doing that, I had many different careers. And so as I look at my journey as a young person, I compare it against the young people that I meet today and think about how it's different for them today. And what do I mean by that? So if you look at young people today, this is the largest young generation of young people that has ever existed in the world. They are incredibly knowledgeable with regard to access to information. They're altruistic. Many young people believe that it's their duty to change the world, and they want to do it through the job that they do and through everything that they do with their life. And I think this is maybe the most important thing. Their identity is being shaped in a global context, so they're very aware, probably more than I was, of everything that's going on in the world. And then you look at the world, and the world is somewhere where we've all felt kind of the massive and quick changes that have happened. The global economic downturn, which is something that's disproportionately actually affected young people. Power shifting from hierarchies, where there's regimented kind of bureaucratic power, to networks, where networks of citizens and individuals are having disproportionate effects on their communities, and much of that is being led by young people. And the idea that access to technology, use of social media is helping create and connect people across boundaries that they, were maybe circumscribed to before. They no longer are. So you can have networks of young people all over the world working on different positive change. But the other thing that this creates for a young person who's navigating their identity is a great feeling of, I would say, dealing with a world that's in flux, creates a great feeling of insecurity. And so what young people need today in terms of being able to look at a career path or a trajectory. I was lucky. I didn't want to do medicine. I think I realized I was going to be a bridge builder. I was going to be somebody who connected between two communities, and I found my path. But for the generation that we're looking at today, they're going to have 7 or 8 different paths. They're going to have, 7 or 8 different jobs over the course of their lifetime. Many of those jobs are going to be in industries that don't exist yet, in companies that don't exist yet. And so, to put that level of responsibility on a young person just means that they need to be incredibly resilient and very sure of why they're passionate about what they're passionate about. And so, in the job that I have, I've had the privilege of being able to travel the world and meet young people all around the world. And I guess the question is, how are they doing? And I want to tell you about some of the stories of young people that I've met. I met a young woman named Amani, who was a Libyan who was in her country through, the deposition of Gaddafi, and was an architect. She was in architecture school. And she decided to quit school and begin to participate in the constitution writing process of her country, because she said, I want to have a mark in the future of where my country goes. I met a young man in Uganda named Emmanuel, who created a small stove that actually that used waste as fuel. And then he created a company where young men who were unemployed would bike into villages and offer to sell the stove to women who spent a lot of their time gathering firewood for dinner every night. And he really cut the amount of time that they would have to do that, because they would be able to use waste as fuel. I met a young woman named Amara from Nigeria. Amara was a daughter of a single mother who had 5 children. And she, rose up the ranks of the company that she was in, and she decided she wanted to give back to her community, and particularly the women who were like her mom. And so she noticed that a lot, the women gathered around, and one of the things that they did very well was weaving. And so they would weave rugs and weave different things. And so she created a project called the Weaving Project, and she helps take their goods to market and helps them kind of sustain livelihood. Now, I tell you these stories to say that, there are literally hundreds of young people around the world. I'm sure many of you have met and know some of these people who are doing the same exact thing. They've applied their passion, their talent, and their love of their local community to make change. And none of them waited for somebody else to do it for them. In fact, many of them said to me, I waited for somebody else to do it, but nobody else was doing it. And so I stepped up and I started doing it. And so I fully believe that empowered young people are agents of change in every walk of life. And so if this is true, which we can all take to be true, then why do we talk about young people as the problem? Why is the predominant conversation that we have a lost generation, or we have a generation of young people who we have to deal with, right? Shouldn't the conversation really be about how young people are driving change in their communities? And I think that we're all part of shifting that conversation, and it's something that I think is incredibly important, particularly when you think about diplomacy. And so that's the world that I live in. And, diplomacy at its core is conversation, right? It's 2 parties coming together to arrive at mutual consensus on a shared goal, in an ideal world at least. And really, the 2 parts of that I believe of any important or good conversation is, one is empathy. The idea that you really have to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and relate to their experience. And the other is relationship building. That, meeting somebody one time and not really understanding who they are is not going to be sustainable. It's not going to sustain a conversation or any meaningful change. And so when I think about, foreign policy goals are really the goals that any of us have in terms of making change around the world, we must include young people in that. And we must do it in a way that's not just tokenistic, right? That's not just saying, well, we have a young person at the table and we're going to take their views into account, and so we check that box. We actually have to be more serious about this, because really all of the prosperity for all of us depends on it. In the 21st century, the most competitive advantage any country is going to have is their ability to use their human talent. And when you have over 50% of the world's population under the age of 30, most of those people are in the developing world. Most of those people are in countries that are growing, that are going to be middle-income countries, that are going to be, have a large portion of the world's middle class. It's in all of our best interest, really, to look at this. And I think we all have a role to play. So even if you don't, do foreign policy and you don't sit in diplomacy, I think there's so much that we can do from our own individual points of view and the things that we've learned to be able to help young people navigate this path that, we can all admit is not an easy thing to do. And so I think that we have to, beyond all playing a role, and beyond conversation and dialogue, we really have to act. And we really need to move kind of beyond just dialogue to action. And so those are some of the things that I'm trying to do in my role. I'm one person, but I think changing the dialogue and ensuring that we're not engaging young people simply in a tokenistic way is incredibly important. Now, there's an American cultural anthropologist named Margaret Mead, who I greatly admire. She's one of my heroes. And she has a wonderful quote that I'll end with. She says, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." Thank you.